Hello, boys and girls. So we're going to be starting chapter 7, specifically section 7.1. And before we start that section and those notes, we're going to do some practice, okay? So here I have this worksheet, and we're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. So we've practiced factoring, and we've practiced different methods of factoring. What we haven't been doing is solving, okay? So now we're going to be adding that to our list, okay? So you might notice the first four have already been factored for you, which is really nice, okay? And so what's different about this from the previous is that, see how we have an equation equal to 0? So now we're going to solve, okay? So I'm going to start with number 1. So number 1 reads k plus 1 times k minus 5 equals 0. So we're going to be applying the zero product property. What that means is you're going to be setting each one equal to 0, because either k plus 1 should equal to 0 or k plus 5 should equal to 0. I'm sorry, k minus 5 equal to 0, or they both could be equal to 0. Okay, so you set them both equal to 0, and then you just solve for each one. So in the first one, all I have to do is solve k by subtracting 1, and then I'm left with k equals -1. Okay, and that's one of my solutions. And the second equation, to solve for k, I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and then I'm left with k equals +5. So both of these would be considered my solutions. K equals -5 and k equals 5. Okay, now there's a name for these. Okay, they're called zeros, or you can think of your zeros as your x-intercepts. Okay, again, you're going to hear about this and once we start taking notes, but these are called zeros or roots. Roots is another word for it. So zeros, roots, and x-intercepts. Okay, make sure you write that down in your notes. Zeros, roots, and x-intercepts. Okay, all right, I'm going to do one more with you. So I'm going to try number 3. Again, they're already factored out for you, so all you have to do is set each binomial equal to 0, or basically each factor equal to 0, and you're just going to solve for it, okay? So in the first one, to solve for it, I'm going to subtract 5 to both sides, and then I'm left with 4k equals -5, and then divide 4 to both sides, and then I'm left with k equals -5/4, okay? If you end up with the fraction, I prefer fractions. Do not put them into decimal, okay? Even if they're improper, that's perfectly fine. Just means you don't have to pick up a calculator, okay? And then this one's more simple. It's just a one-step equation, which I realize that some of you can probably do this mental math. Okay, so this is k equals -1. So those two are your solutions, okay? So now I'm going to have you practice. So if you can try number 2 and 4. So pause the video, copy this on a piece of paper. Give yourself a few seconds, because I don't think it'll take too long, and then come back and check for the answer. Okay, boys and girls, if you did this correctly, then technically for number 2, you should have gotten a equals -1 and -2. And then for number 4, m equals -3/2 and -3/4. Okay, so 2 solutions. All right, so now we're going to try another one, okay? And again, I'm just going to pick some random ones, okay? So here we go. I'm going to move down to number 7, okay? So number 7, what you notice is we have a quadratic equation on the left-hand side, so it's not factored. What that means, we're going to have to factor it out. But if you notice, it's actually equal to -2 and not 0. They should always be equal to -2. So what the first thing you're going to do is you're going to add 2 to both sides to basically move the constant to the left side, okay? In doing that, what would happen is the right side, those two constants will cancel out, and now you're left with n squared minus 10n plus 22 equals to 0, okay? And that's what you want. You want a quadratic equation. And you want to set it equal to 0. So now what we have to do is now we actually have to factor it out ourselves. Okay, so I previously taught you how to factor. So whenever you have a quadratic equation, remember, always look for a GCF. So no matter what, just look for it. And if you notice, there's no GCF between all three. So now you can use the AC method, okay? And that's where I said multiply A times C. In this case, it's just 22. And your B, negative 10. So remember, and I'm going to do it with you just because I know that there's going to be some people wondering what the heck I did. You're looking for two numbers that multiply to give you whatever A times C is, and those same factors to add and give you negative 10. Okay. Can you think of those two numbers? When can you multiply two numbers and end up with a positive 22 and add those two numbers and end with a negative 10? Okay, so I was trying to think of those two numbers and then I realized I did a mistake. But see, no one's here with me to see that. Boys and girls, when you add 2, that'll actually give you 24. Okay, and I wrote down 22. So let me change that to 24. And now let me repeat this. Two numbers that multiply to give you 24 and add to give you negative 10. Some of you are probably like, change it, change it. Okay, and so hopefully you thought of those two numbers, and it'll be 12. Well, let me see. Okay, the two numbers that you should have thought out were 6 and 4. 6 times 4 will give you 24, and 6 plus 4 will give you 10, but we want it to be negative, okay? So negative 6 plus negative 4 will give you negative 10. Okay, so those are our factors. Okay, so I'm running out of room, so I'm going to do it on this side, okay? So basically what your factor should be is n minus 6 and n minus 4 should equal 0, okay? And then remember, you can verify by doing FOIL, and then you should end up with what we started, which is this, okay? So now you just apply the zero product property. So you're going to set each one equal to 0, and you're going to, solve for n, okay? So in this case, we should get n equals 6 and n equals 4. And those are our two solutions, okay? All right, so I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'm going to have you guys practice one. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to do with you guys is number 9. Number 9 reads 6n squared minus 18n minus 18 equals 6. So remember, as I previously stated, you want to make sure that your equations are always equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 6 to both sides, okay? And then I'm going to make sure I take my time. And then we're going to be left with 6n squared minus 18n. And then negative 18 minus 6 will give you negative 24 and then equal to 0. Okay? All right, so now we have a quadratic equation and it's equal to 0. So we're going to go ahead and factor out. But again, before you factor out, let's look for a GCF between all three. So if you notice, now we have a coefficient here. So 6, 18, and 24. Okay, those are actually all even. So for a fact, we have a common factor. Okay, and remember, I don't have to look at the variables because there's 2 n's here, 1 n here, and no n's here. So I won't be able to factor out a variable, but I could factor out a coefficient. In this case, our greatest common factor is 6. So I'm going to factor out a 6. Okay. And in doing that, I'm left with n squared minus 3n minus 4 equals 0. Which is really nice because in doing that, look, I ended up factoring a 6 that I ended up with really small numbers. Okay. So again, just a refresher, I'm going to remind you, you're looking for two numbers that multiply to give you whatever A times C is, and in this case, it's going to be negative 4. And those numbers that add to give you whatever B is. In this case, it's negative 3. Okay? So when do we multiply two numbers, end with the negative, and add those two numbers and end with the negative? Okay? Can you think of what those numbers are? Okay. All right, so hopefully you came up with -4 and 1. So -4 times 1 will give you -4, and -4 plus 1 will give you -3. Okay, so now that we have our factors, now we can write it out. Okay, so here, I'm running out of room, so let me actually zoom out here. Okay, so I'm going to write it on the side. So now we're going to write n minus 4 times n plus 1 equals to 0. And don't forget we had factor out a 6, so keep the 6 on the outside, okay? So now you're going to write each factor equal to 0. So here, if I start with this one, 6 equals 0, n minus 4 equals 0, and n plus 1 equals to 0. Now, if you're wondering, wait a minute, how do we solve here for a variable? Well, actually you don't. This doesn't have a variable, but I did it anyways just to show you. This is a factor, but 6 will never equal 0, and there's no variable to solve. So whenever you have a coefficient on the outside, don't even bother doing this. Again, I just did it just to show you. 6 will never equal 0, and there's no variable. So you don't have to worry about solving it, okay? But in these, we can. So again, you would add 4 to both sides. Again, you can almost do mental math here. You would end up with n equals 4. And over here, you would subtract 1 to both sides, and you would end up with n equals -1. Okay? All right, awesome. So now I'm going to have you guys try 2 on your own, okay? So ready? The 2 that you're going to try on your own are numbers 8 and 10. So copy 8 down, copy 10 down, and then pause the video, give yourself a few seconds to do them on your own, and then come back. All right, boys and girls, if you did it correctly, these are your solutions for number 8 and 10. So 8, you should have gotten n equals 3 and -6. And number 10, you should have gotten r equals 1. Now, if you're wondering why you only got one solution, I'm assuming both factors were exactly the same, so you only have to write it one time. Okay? All right, let's move on to the next example. Okay, so the next one that I'm going to do with you is number 13. And number 13 reads -4k squared minus 8k minus 3 equals -3 minus 5k squared. Okay, this is literally the same thing that we've been doing. The only thing is now you have 2 numbers on the right-hand side. And again, remember, this always needs to be equal to 0. So I don't care if it's 1, 2, or 3 terms. Move them to the left-hand side, okay? Make sure it's always equal to 0, okay? So in order for us to make this equal to 0, then we're basically going to get rid of -3 by adding 3, okay? And if you notice, the 3's will cancel out on both sides, and then we're going to be adding 5k squared, okay? All right, so now we're left with, ready? -k squared plus 5k squared, that's going to be k squared minus 8k, and that'll be equal to 0. Okay, so we do not have a trinomial, we actually have a binomial. So that's fine. So as usual, we're going to factor these. And remember, always look for that GCF. And in this case, we do have a GCF. Between these two terms, we have a common factor of k. Okay. So what's left on the inside would be k minus 8 equals to 0. Okay. And again, to solve, just set each one equal to 0. So we're going to have k equal to 0 and k minus 8 equal to 0. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay. There we go. Oops, sorry. How to move my camera. Okay. So if you notice in the first one, when you set k equal to 0, technically you already have it solved. So that's actually one solution. And the next one, to solve for k, we're just going to add 8 to both sides. And then we have k equals 8. And that's it. So now you've solved for both. Okay. So I am going to do, I think, one more with you. And the last one that I'm going to do is, let's try 21. They usually say the ones at the end are usually the hardest. So here's number 21, okay? And okay, perfect. Actually, I'm going to zoom in a bit. Okay, here we go. We have 8x squared. There we go. 8x squared plus 21 equals negative 59x. So again, I need it to equal to 0, so I'm going to add 59x to both sides. And then I want to rewrite it, and I always want to rewrite it in standard form. So I end up with 8x squared plus 59x plus 21 equals 0. So make sure you rewrite it in standard form, okay? And then, okay, and then the next step now would be to see if we have a common factor. So if I look at all of these, 8, 59, and 21, I don't see a common factor. Okay, so here we go. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to give you whatever A times C is. And in this case, A times C is 168. And then we're going to add to see what 59 is. Okay, so it might take you a bit, trial and error, or you might want to use a calculator, okay? But can you think of two numbers that when you multiply give you 168 and add to give you 59? So if you divide 168 by 3, it'll give you 56. So 3 times 56 will give you 168, and 3 plus 56 will give you 59. Okay, so those are our factors. Okay, so here we go. We have a coefficient of 8. So when we have a coefficient of 8 for our A, if you recall, you're supposed to repeat it. So we're going to write 8x plus 3 and 8x plus 56, and we're going to set it equal to 0. Okay, let me zoom out a bit. Okay, so here we go. Sorry for that glare. And I'm moving my camera. Okay, so again, when we do FOIL, we have to get rid of one of the 8's because this will give you 64 and we just want 8. So if you're thinking which 8 should we get rid of, and it should be from the second one, okay? So we're going to get rid of this 8. Plus, this is the one where it won't give you a fraction. So now we're left with x plus 7 equals 0 and 8x plus 3, okay? So now that you have these, go ahead and set each one equal to 0 and solve for it, okay? Okay, so I had to erase it because I didn't have enough room. So 8x plus 3 equals 0. We're going to subtract 3 to both sides, and then we're going to end up with 8x equals negative 3, and then divide 8 to both sides. So our first solution would be x equals negative 3 over 8. Okay, and that's one of our solutions. In the second one, we're going to subtract 7 to both sides, and x equals negative 7. And that's it. Okay, so these are our two solutions. All right, so I think you have now enough to get started with today's assignment. Today's assignment is not going to be heavy, and it'll make tomorrow's notes and assignment run a little bit easier, okay? Again, remember all your solutions, they're called zeros or roots or x-intercepts, okay? All right, boys and girls, go ahead and get started. And as always, if you need help, all you have to do is jump back in the chat and ask for help.